The text arrived on a Friday afternoon while I was reviewing the final calibration for our new thermal sensors. It was from my mother, Susan. "Samantha, your father and I have been thinking. The winter solstice gala at the ski lodge is going to be very high-end this year. Nicole's in-laws, the Sterlings, will be there. We think it's better if you sit this one out. Your whole science vibe is a bit too blue-collar for them. We don't want to ruin the aesthetic. You understand." I stared at the screen. The text wasn't an apology. It was an eviction notice from my own family. "Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community." I didn't cry. I didn't type out a paragraph begging them to reconsider. I didn't ask why my sister Nicole, whose biggest achievement was unboxing handbags on social media, was considered elite while I was considered an embarrassment. I just typed one word: understood. Then I turned off my phone and walked out of the lab. I stepped onto the observation deck of the TerraGen Innovation Campus. Below me, 300 of the brightest minds in green energy were working to save the planet. To my left, the living wall stretched up 4 stories purifying the air. To my right, the award case held the Forbes 30 Under 30 plaque with my name on it. My family thought I was a struggling lab rat because that is the only story they know how to tell. I checked my tablet. Monday morning. 9 a.m. Meeting with Sterling Oil. Richard Sterling, the very man my parents were so desperate to impress at their gala, was coming to my office to beg for a partnership. They didn't know that. They didn't know that my company TerraGen was valued at $750 million. They didn't know my personal net worth hovered around $450 million. As I prepped the dossier, I let myself analyze their behavior. It wasn't just cruelty, it was cognitive bias. I call it the halo effect of the golden child. See, my parents look at Nicole shiny, loud, perfectly groomed, and they see success. They see a halo. They equate social visibility with competence. Then they look at me, quiet, studious, often wearing a lab coat, and they see the opposite. They see failure. They can't process the idea that power doesn't always glitter. To Susan and Robert, if you aren't posting about it, it isn't happening. They view the world through a filter where appearance is the only currency, and because I refuse to play that market, they assume I'm bankrupt. I swiped through the Sterling Oil financials. They were bleeding cash. They weren't elite. They were desperate. And my parents had just uninvited the only person who could throw them a lifeline. I felt a cold, sharp sense of clarity. This wasn't a family dynamic anymore. It was a business transaction where one party had severely underestimated the other's leverage. I closed the file. Monday was going to be interesting. Monday morning at the TerraGen Innovation Campus felt less like a workplace and more like a fortress preparing for a siege. At 8 a.m., I stood in the war room with my executive team. On the smart glass wall, the financials for Sterling Oil were displayed in red. They weren't just a potential partner. They were a company on the brink of an environmental catastrophe. My vice president of strategy, Marcus, tapped the screen. "They're desperate, Samantha. The EPA is threatening a fine that would wipe out their quarterly profits for the next 3 years. They don't just need our biofuel tech. They need a miracle." I stared at the name on the dossier, Richard Sterling. This was the man my parents had spent 6 months trying to impress. This was the elite lineage that made my sister Nicole's marriage the crown jewel of the family achievements. And here he was, unknowingly scheduled to walk into my office and beg for a lifeline. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I didn't smile. I didn't feel giddy. I felt a cold professional detachment. I went back to my private office to prepare. I adjusted the cuffs of my silk blouse and looked at the reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window. People often ask why I never told my family about my success. They assume it was fear or imposter syndrome or some deep-seated need to avoid conflict. It wasn't. It was a strategic boundary. I call it the silence of the architect. Years ago, I realized that my parents and Nicole only care about the aesthetic of success, the parties, the photos, the visible status symbols. They are obsessed with the wallpaper of life. But I am an architect. I care about the foundation, the load-bearing walls, the structural integrity. I realize that explaining the blueprint to people who only care about the wallpaper is a waste of breath. It cheapens the work. Every time I tried to share a milestone, a grant won, a patent filed, they would glaze over because it wasn't shiny enough. So I stopped. I didn't hide my empire to protect myself from their judgment. I hid it to protect my empire from their shallowness. I kept my world pure by keeping them out of it. My assistant buzzed in. The Sterling Oil team has arrived. They're in the main conference room. I put on my blazer. It felt like armor. I wasn't Samantha the disappointment today. I wasn't the sister who didn't fit the aesthetic. I was the CEO of the only company that could save Richard Sterling's legacy. I grabbed the file. The silence was over. It was time to show them the blueprint. At 10 a.m., the heavy oak doors of the main conference room swung open. My assistant held them wide as Richard Sterling, his son Brandon, and 3 senior executives marched in. They walked with the heavy, confident steps of men who are used to owning every room they enter. They didn't look at the walls. They didn't look at the awards. They looked straight at the empty chair at the head of the table, waiting for the person they had come to conquer. I was standing by the window, my back to them, watching the wind turbines spin on the far ridge. "Mr. Sterling," I said, not turning around yet. "Welcome to Terrigen." "Thank you," Richard said, his voice booming. "We're eager to meet the mind behind this operation. We've heard impressive things." I turned slowly. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was a vacuum. It sucked the air right out of the room. Brandon, my brother-in-law, the man who had spent the last 5 years making jokes about my little science experiments at Thanksgiving, froze mid-step. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He blinked as if trying to reboot his brain. "Samantha," he finally choked out. What are you doing here? Do you work here?" I didn't smile. I didn't soften. I walked to the head of the table and placed my hand on the leather chair. "I'm the CEO. Brandon, please sit down." Brandon looked at his father. Richard Sterling looked at me, then at Brandon, then back at me. The confusion on his face was genuine. "You know her?" Richard asked his son, his voice tight. She's Nicole's sister," Brandon stammered. The one we..." He trailed off. He couldn't finish the sentence. "The one we uninvited, the one we mocked, the one who wasn't good enough." Richard's eyes narrowed. He looked at the Forbes 30 under 30 plaque on the wall, then back at me. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The blue-collar embarrassment his in-laws were so desperate to hide from him was the very titan of industry he had come to court. He didn't look angry. He looked terrified. He looked like a man who just realized he had brought a knife to a nuclear war. "Miss Samantha," Richard said, his tone shifting instantly from arrogance to deference. "I had no idea. Your family. They never mentioned." "My family doesn't know," I said, taking my seat. "And as of right now, that is the least of your problems. Shall we begin?" The meeting proceeded with a surreal tension. My team presented the data efficiency rates, carbon capture metrics, scalability. Brandon sat in stunned silence, unable to look me in the eye. But Richard was focused. He was a shark, and he smelled blood his own. 40 minutes in, I signaled for the lights to dim. "Richard," I said, leaning forward. "Let's cut the corporate dance. You aren't here because you want to pivot to green energy. You aren't here because you admire my innovation." I tapped the screen. A new slide appeared. It wasn't a Terrigen projection. It was an internal EPA report leaked 2 days ago, detailing massive carbon violations at Sterling Oil's 3 largest refineries. The fines were projected to be in the billions. You're here because the EPA is about to levy a fine that will bankrupt you. You need my proprietary biofuel blend to lower your emissions below the threshold before the next audit in January. You didn't come here to invest, Richard. You came here to be saved. The room went deathly still. Brandon looked at his father in horror. "Is that true?" Richard slumped in his chair. The arrogance evaporated, leaving just an old, tired man staring at the end of his legacy. "Yes," he whispered. "We have 6 weeks. If we don't have your tech, Sterling Oil is finished." I let the silence stretch. I let them feel the weight of it. So I said, my voice calm and level, "Here is the situation. My family uninvited me from your gala because they thought I wasn't good enough to be in the same room as you, and yet here you are in my room begging for my help." Richard's face turned a violent shade of red. He wasn't angry at me. He was furious at the absurdity of it. He turned to Brandon, his voice shaking with rage. "You mean to tell me that your in-laws, the people who have been preening around me for months, treated the one person who can save my company like she was the help? They insulted her. To impress me." Brandon shrank back. "I didn't know, Dad. I swear. They just said she was." different. Fix it, Richard snarled. You get on the phone with your wife and her parents right now. You tell them they have made a catastrophic mistake. You tell them if this deal falls through because of their snobbery, I will personally dismantle their social standing brick by brick. Do you understand me? Brandon scrambled for his phone. I watched, unmoved. The architect had revealed the blueprint, and the wallpaper was starting to peel. Make the call outside, I said. We have terms to discuss. The deal was finalized at 3 p.m. As Richard Sterling and his team left, they looked like men who had been pulled back from the edge of a cliff. Brandon wouldn't meet my eyes as he walked out. I imagined the phone call he had made from the hallway, the screaming, the panic, the realization that the Winter Solstice Gala had just become a minefield. 30 minutes later, the fallout began. My phone lit up on my desk. First, a text from Nicole. Sam, oh my God, Brandon just called. There's been a huge misunderstanding. Mom and Dad are freaking out. We definitely want you at the gala. We were just trying to protect you from feeling out of place, but obviously that was silly. Please call me back. I didn't answer. 10 minutes later, my mother called. Then my father. Then Nicole again. The tone of the messages shifted rapidly from misunderstanding to emergency. Samantha, please pick up. We're outside your building. The security won't let us up. We need to talk. I looked at the security feed on my monitor. There they were in the lobby of the Terragen Innovation Campus, Susan, Robert, and Nicole. They looked small against the backdrop of the 4-story living wall and the sleek, sustainable architecture. They looked like tourists in a future they hadn't helped build. I buzzed security. When the elevator doors opened, my mother rushed out first, her face flushed. Samantha, oh thank God. We've been trying to reach you. Brandon said you're the CEO. I am, I said, leaning against my desk. I didn't offer them a seat. Why didn't you tell us? My father asked, his voice shaking. We had no idea. We thought you were struggling. You thought I was struggling because it made you feel superior, I said. And now you're here not because you're proud, but because you're terrified. You're terrified that Richard Sterling is going to cut you off socially because you insulted his business partner. That's not true, Nicole cried, though her eyes darted around the office, assessing the wealth, the power, the sheer scale of what I had built. We're family. We want you at the gala. You have to come. We'll put you at the head table with Richard and Brandon. It'll be perfect. I looked at them, really looked at them. For years I had craved this invitation. I had wanted a seat at their table. But now, standing in the empire I had built from scratch, I realized something. Their table was small. It was crowded with insecurity and pretense, and I had outgrown it. I'm not coming to the gala, I said. The silence was heavy. My mother stepped forward, tears welling in her eyes, tears of frustration, not sorrow. But you have to, Richard expects you. If you don't come, it makes us look terrible. Think about the family, Samantha. I am thinking about the family, I said. I'm thinking about the family that uninvited me 3 days ago because I wasn't elite enough. I'm thinking about the family that only values me now that I have a price tag attached. We were trying to protect you, my father insisted. We didn't think you'd fit in. I don't fit in, I agreed. And that is my greatest asset. I walked over to the window, looking out at the wind turbines spinning in the distance. You uninvited me from your table because you thought I had nothing to bring. You didn't realize I was busy building my own table. And at my table, we don't save seats for people who only show up when there's a feast. My seat is taken by people who starved with me, by the team out there. I gestured to the lab who believed in me when I had nothing but a laptop and a crazy idea about saving the world. Nicole looked down. My parents looked pale. They knew in that moment that the dynamic had shifted forever. They could no longer look down on me, but they couldn't reach up to me either. I was out of their orbit. I signed the deal with Sterling Oil, I said, turning back to them. I'm saving Richard's company because it's the right thing for the planet, not to save your reputation. Business is business, but my personal time, that's expensive. And you can't afford it. Please, my mother whispered, just come for an hour. No, I said. I have plans. Security will show you out. The night of the Winter Solstice Gala, the ski lodge in Vail was undoubtedly packed with socialites, champagne towers, and people desperate to be seen. I wasn't there. I was 3,000 feet up, a different mountain in a rustic cabin with no reception, surrounded by my executive team Marcus, Sarah, David, and a few of my oldest friends. The fire was roaring. We were wearing flannel, not tuxedos. We were eating chili out of mugs, not caviar. My phone buzzed on the table. A notification from the legal team, sterling deal executed, funds transferred. I swiped it away without unlocking the screen. I looked around the room at the faces of the people who knew me before the money, before the Forbes cover, before the power. The people who knew me, not just the CEO. To the architects, Marcus said, raising his mug. To the ones who build. To the architects, I replied, clinking my mug against his. The warmth in that room was real. It didn't need a filter. It didn't need a price tag. I had built my own table, and for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I belonged. If you've ever had to build your own table to find where you belong, share this story. You are not alone.